One arrogant agent's ego-driven power trip just cost his city a $1 billion deal and triggered a collapse that would end his life as he knew it. He thought he was the one in control, but he had no idea he was playing a rigged game that would land him an enormous prison sentence. I've always believed that airport security agents possess a unique kind of arrogance. They operate in a world where a badge gives them the illusion of absolute authority. And for Agent Marcus Thorne, that illusion was his religion. I was standing in the customs line at Terminal 4, waiting for a business delegation from Dubai to clear the checkpoint. We were there to finalize a $950 million infrastructure deal, the kind of project that changes the skyline of a city and the career trajectory of everyone involved. Marcus stood at the front of the line, his uniform pressed to a razor's edge, his eyes scanning the crowd not for threats, but for people he deemed appropriate to harass. When the lead negotiator of our group, a brilliant man named Ahmed, approached the desk, the air in the room seemed to shift. Ahmed had barely set his passport down before Marcus scoffed, sliding the document back with a flick of his wrist. He didn't check the data. He didn't scan the biometric chip. He just leaned back, folded his arms, and let out a laugh that was loud enough to stop the surrounding conversations. "I don't think so," Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. He didn't bother to keep his tone professional. "We've got enough trouble with folks like you trying to bring in illegal items. I'm not letting this through until we do a full, invasive manual scan of every single piece of gear in your team's possession. And maybe, if you're lucky, I'll decide you're allowed to step foot in this country by the time the sun goes down." I stepped forward, my pulse racing. "Agent, this is a diplomatic business delegation. They have the proper visas, the proper clearance, and they are here on an invitation from the mayor's office. You're overstepping." Marcus looked at me as if I were a speck of dust on his polished boots. "Is that so? You want to tell me how to do my job? Maybe you're part of their little organized scheme, too. Should I call in the Internal Security Service to check if you're trying to move restricted items under the guise of business?" He was baiting me, relishing the power trip. He knew exactly what he was doing. He grabbed a radio and began barking orders, intentionally stalling the entire line. He started making loud, degrading comments about the group's background, using language that was as prejudiced as it was unprofessional. He even signaled for his colleagues to start opening their luggage with unnecessary force, tossing delicate, expensive equipment onto the cold, hard floor of the terminal as if it were trash. Ahmed looked at me, his expression shifting from diplomatic patience to cold, hard resolve. He had spent years building a reputation for integrity, and he wasn't going to let a small-minded official dismantle it for a cheap power play. He took out his phone, made a single, calm call in his native language, and then turned back to Marcus. "You think you're protecting this country," Ahmed said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that made Marcus's smirk falter for a split second. "But you have no idea what you've just interrupted. You aren't just searching luggage. You're effectively canceling a quarter of the city's annual economic growth strategy." Marcus rolled his eyes. Yeah. Save the sob story for the federal agents who are going to be interviewing you about why you're so desperate to get in." As he moved to grab Ahmed's laptop bag, the one containing the encrypted hard drives that held the keys to the entire $950 million deal, the airport's fire alarm began to wail. But it wasn't a standard drill. Simultaneously, every single digital display board in the terminal went black, replaced by a single pulsing red icon. Then the sound of boots echoed through the hall. It wasn't the police. It was a high-level internal security team, led by a woman in a suit that looked far more expensive than any airport uniform. She marched directly past Marcus and stopped right in front of Ahmed, bowing slightly. Marcus's face drained of color as the woman looked at him with eyes that promised a very long, very painful career ending. "Agent Thorne," she said, her voice freezing the entire room. "We need to talk about the incident you just triggered." The woman in the sharp charcoal suit was Director Vance, the head of the city's Port Oversight Committee. I had only ever seen her on the evening news, usually standing next to the mayor during budget signings. Seeing her here, in the middle of a terminal, felt like watching a localized hurricane touch down. Marcus, whose bravado had been bulletproof just 60 seconds ago, suddenly looked like a schoolboy caught stealing from the supply closet. He tried to straighten his tie, but his hands were visibly trembling. "Director, I was just following the standard search protocols," Marcus stammered, his eyes darting toward the internal security team surrounding us. "They weren't there for the travelers. They were there for him." Director Vance didn't even look at him. She walked straight to Ahmed, ignoring the scattered broken equipment on the floor. "Mr. Al-Sayed, please accept the city's deepest, most immediate apologies. We are aware of the communication breach that occurred here today, and we are already taking steps to rectify the situation at the highest level." Marcus looked ready to faint. "Breach? What breach? This is a search for restricted items. I was doing my duty to keep this place safe." The director finally turned, her gaze icy. "You weren't keeping anyone safe, Thorne. You were obstructing a multi-billion-dollar private-public partnership that has been under state-level protection for 6 months. Every single piece of equipment you just inspected with such hostility contains proprietary, secure, intellectual property. By forcing them open in an unshielded environment, you have effectively triggered a remote wipe protocol initiated by the developers the moment you touch the security seals." A collective gasp rippled through the terminal. The screens, still pulsing with that ominous red icon, began to display scrolling lines of data, a digital ledger of exactly what had happened in the last 10 minutes. Every insult Marcus had hurled, every derogatory remark he'd made, and every instance of him mishandling the property was being recorded, time-stamped, and transmitted directly to the Regional Oversight Board. "You've turned a simple customs stop into a massive liability case," the director continued, her voice cold and devoid of sympathy. "The developers have just invoked the total withdrawal clause of their contract. Because of your actions, the $950 million investment is currently being liquidated and moved to a neighboring state that actually welcomes their business. You didn't just insult a person. You bankrupted this terminal's future." I watched in silence as the weight of her words settled over the room. The other airport staff, who had been laughing at Marcus's antics minutes earlier, were now backing away, terrified of being associated with him. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, to claim he was just being thorough, but the director signaled to the security team behind her. "Take his badge, his electronic access keys, and his communication devices," she commanded. "Escort him to the internal security holding facility. We have an extensive list of allegations to go through, including the attempt to frame international diplomats and the intentional destruction of classified business assets. He's looking at a massive investigation, and frankly, I doubt he'll ever hold a position of authority again." As they moved in to strip him of his badge, Marcus panicked. He lunged backward, stumbling over a piece of the luggage he had just thrown. "You can't do this. I have contacts. You don't know who I know." He scrambled to his feet, desperate, and made a break for the emergency exit. The terminal, already in chaos, became a frantic scene of motion. The security team didn't even draw their weapons. They simply signaled the automated blast doors to slam shut. Marcus hit the glass doors with a thud, trapped between the sliding barriers. He turned back, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. That's when the silence hit. Everyone in the terminal stopped. The screens changed again, shifting from red to a live feed of the airport's main gate, where dozens of news vans were already pulling up. Word had gotten out. Director Vance leaned in close to Marcus, whispering something that made his blood run cold. Whatever she said, it caused his legs to give out entirely. He collapsed to his knees, staring at the floor. Then he looked up at me. His eyes weren't full of hatred anymore. They were full of terror. "You don't understand," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation. "I didn't start this on my own. I was told to find a reason to stop them. Someone high up? Someone in the mayor's office? They told me to make sure this deal never cleared customs." I froze. The investigation wasn't just about a racist agent having a bad day. We had just stumbled into the middle of a massive citywide conspiracy. Before I could process the gravity of his confession, a loud, sharp crack echoed through the terminal, followed by the sudden, chilling silence of the emergency power cutting out completely. Darkness engulfed the hall, and in the pitch black I heard the distinctive sound of a heavy metal door being forced open from the outside. The silence in the pitch-black terminal was absolute, a heavy vacuum that seemed to suck the very oxygen out of the room. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. In the darkness I could hear the director's sharp intake of breath and the frantic, scuffling sounds of the internal security detail positioning themselves. Then the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of heavy boots hitting the linoleum floor echoed from the arrivals hall. It wasn't the sound of the airport staff. This was tactical, precise, and entirely too coordinated. "Don't move," a voice commanded from the shadows, filtered through a radio. It wasn't one of the airport guards. It was deeper, more authoritative, the kind of voice that spoke with the weight of someone who knew exactly how to dismantle a life. Just as the tension threatened to snap, the emergency floodlights flickered to life, bathing the terminal in a harsh, clinical yellow glow. A group of individuals in dark, unmarked tactical gear had entered, but they weren't here to hurt us. They were the state-level oversight team, the ones the mayor had desperately hoped to keep away from this terminal. Behind them, flanked by lawyers and a state investigator, stood the mayor himself, but he didn't look like the confident politician I'd seen on TV. He looked pale, sweating, and entirely defeated. Director Vance stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You're late, gentlemen, but I believe you'll find the evidence you were looking for right here on the terminal's central server." She pointed to the screens, which were now displaying a cascade of financial transactions and encrypted messages. It turned out Marcus Thorne wasn't just a bigoted guard. He was the lowest rung in an organized scheme to sabotage the $950 million deal. The goal was to block the project long enough for a competing, state-favored construction firm to swoop in and claim the contract at a fraction of the cost. A massive illicit kickback scheme involving the mayor's inner circle. Marcus had been promised a promotion and a bonus to ensure that the delegation never made it through customs. He had been the scapegoat, the loud, aggressive distraction designed to make the delegation lose their cool, but he had underestimated the sheer, overwhelming sophistication of the people he was trying to bully. Ahmed stood up, brushing the dust from his suit, his demeanor calm and composed. He looked at Marcus, who was still huddled on the floor, handcuffed and broken. "You fought for a small, corrupt dream, Marcus. You ruined your own life for a bribe that would have been gone in a year, while throwing away a legacy that could have helped thousands." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Within 48 hours, the mayor had resigned, facing an indictment for his role in the group's activities. The investigative team uncovered a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of the city government. Because of the total withdrawal clause Ahmed had triggered, the city was forced to pay a massive settlement. But the project wasn't lost. It was relocated, and the media storm that followed ensured that the reputations of everyone involved in the sabotage were permanently incinerated. As for Marcus, he didn't just lose his badge. The internal security investigation, bolstered by the digital trail he'd been foolish enough to leave on the airport's secure network, unearthed a mountain of evidence. He was charged with systemic discrimination, tampering with international assets, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Given the federal nature of the assets he'd sabotaged, He faced a truly massive prison sentence, decades of confinement in a federal facility. I saw him one last time, months later, as he was being transferred. He looked like a ghost of the man who had stood at that desk, mocking us with his arrogance. He didn't look at me, but I didn't need him to. The karma hadn't just been instant, it had been absolute. The $950 million project went on to transform a neighboring city, bringing jobs and prosperity that we could have had, if not for one man's pathetic, hateful need to feel powerful. Standing in that same terminal a year later, I watched a new, more diverse team of security agents working with a level of professionalism that Marcus Thorne could never have comprehended. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady competence. I walked through the gate, feeling a strange sense of peace. Justice in this world is rare. It's often slow, buried under bureaucracy and excuses. But every once in a while, it hits with the force of a wrecking ball, reminding us that even the smallest, most hateful people can be the architects of their own destruction. As I boarded my flight, I looked back at the customs desk one last time. The space was empty, a blank slate where a nightmare had once been, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should.